Maria had always dreamed of moving to a new place, a new school, where she could start fresh. Her old school had been full of memories, both good and bad, and the thought of leaving it behind gave her a sense of excitement. But as her family packed up and relocated to a different city, Maria couldn't help but feel a little nervous. She had always been the new kid before, but this time felt different. The new town was much smaller than the one she had come from. It had a peaceful, quiet vibe that she hadn't experienced before. Everything felt strange, but the air was crisp, and the scenery was beautiful. Her new school, however, was big. Huge, even. It seemed like everyone already knew everyone else, and Maria couldn't help but wonder if she would fit in at all. The first day arrived, and Maria stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her school uniform, making sure she looked presentable. Her long braids hung neatly down her back, and she took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She had spent so much time worrying about being judged or standing out too much that she forgot to notice something simple. This was her chance to show everyone who she really was. When Maria entered the school, she immediately noticed the stares. She wasn't sure if they were because of her skin color or because she was new, but there was no mistaking the fact that people were looking at her. She had always been the only black girl in her old school, so this wasn't a surprise. But it didn't make it any easier. She tried to ignore the whispers and pretend she didn't hear the comments. She had learned long ago to keep her head down and avoid the spotlight, even though she longed for acceptance. During her first class, she found a seat near the back. She was hoping to blend in and just get through the day without making any waves. As the teacher introduced herself and began explaining the lesson, Maria noticed a group of girls seated near the front. They were laughing and chatting loudly, completely ignoring the lesson. One of them, a girl with blonde hair named Jessica, turned around and made eye contact with Maria. She quickly looked away, but Maria caught a glimpse of the judgmental look in her eyes. After that gym class, Maria felt different. The tension she had been carrying for so long seemed to lighten. She had stood up for herself, and it felt empowering. The whispers and sideways glances from Jessica and her friends were still there, but they didn't sting like they used to. Maria knew that she had earned their respect, even if they would never admit it. What mattered now was that she was no longer allowing them to control how she felt about herself. The next few days at school passed quietly. Maria went about her routine, attending classes, studying, and spending time with Emma and her small group of friends. They didn't talk about the incident in gym class, it wasn't something that needed to be discussed. But Maria could tell that people were looking at her differently. It wasn't just the students who had seen her play that day. It was everyone. The quiet strength she had shown had made an impression, and Maria was beginning to notice it in the way people spoke to her, in the way they looked at her. As the weeks passed, Maria's life at school seemed to settle into a new rhythm. The bullying had stopped, but the impact of what had happened lingered. She could feel the change in how people treated her, not just the students in her class, but even some of the teachers. There was a new level of respect that Maria had never experienced before. She wasn't just the new girl anymore. She wasn't the outsider. She was simply Maria, a student who belonged, who had earned her place. At lunch, Maria and Emma sat together with their group of friends. It wasn't a large group, but it was made up of people who genuinely cared about each other. They laughed, talked about their favorite shows, and exchanged stories from their weekends. It was a peaceful, easy atmosphere, one that Maria had dreamed of for so long. But even as Maria enjoyed these moments, she knew that there were still those who looked at her with a certain distance. Jessica and her group were no longer openly hostile, but there was still a quiet tension when they crossed paths. Sometimes Maria would catch them watching her from across the cafeteria, but now she didn't feel threatened by their gazes. She didn't need their approval. What mattered was the group she had built around her, people who valued her for who she was, not for where she came from or how she looked. One afternoon, as Maria was leaving class, she noticed Jessica walking down the hallway with her friends. This time, however, something was different. Instead of the usual sideways glance or whispered comment, Jessica made eye contact with Maria. There was no mockery, no judgment, just a neutral look. Maria stopped in her tracks, unsure of what to expect. Jessica took a deep breath and then, unexpectedly, said, "I heard about your history project. You did a good job." Maria was taken aback. She hadn't expected Jessica to acknowledge her work, let alone compliment her. It wasn't much, but it felt significant. Maria gave her a small smile. "Thanks," she said simply, before walking past her. As she continued down the hallway, Maria felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about receiving compliments from Jessica, it was about knowing that she had stood her ground and proven herself. She had earned that compliment, just as she had earned everything else in her school life. Later that week, during a class discussion, the teacher asked the students to share their thoughts on a topic they had recently studied. Maria raised her hand, her heart steady. When the teacher called on her, Maria spoke confidently about her perspective, making points that even the teacher seemed impressed by. As she finished, she noticed a few students glancing at her with new eyes. They didn't know her as the quiet, reserved girl anymore. They saw her as someone who could hold her own in a conversation, someone whose opinion mattered. As the school year neared its end, Maria's reputation had shifted from the shy new girl to someone with undeniable strength and character. She was no longer just getting by. She was thriving. Her grades had improved, and her teachers began to notice the quiet confidence that she brought to class every day. Even the students who had once ignored her started to approach her with kindness, some even apologizing for their previous behavior. One afternoon, as the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Maria stood up from her desk and gathered her things. She was used to the routine now, the walk down the hallway to the exit, the brief exchange of goodbyes with Emma, and the quiet ride home. But today was different. Today, as she stepped outside, the sun felt a little warmer on her skin, and the world seemed a little brighter. Maria had walked through a storm of judgment and cruelty, and now she stood on the other side, stronger and more certain of herself than ever before. At home, Maria's parents noticed the change in her too. She was more open about her day, more confident in her stories. She spoke about her new friends and the projects she had worked on, and her parents couldn't help but feel proud of how far she had come. Maria had always been strong, but now, she had learned to embrace that strength in a way that was visible to everyone around her. The real turning point came during a school assembly at the end of the year. It was a celebration of the students who had shown the most improvement, whether academically or personally. Maria hadn't expected to be called up, but when the principal announced her name, she felt a rush of emotion. "Maria has shown incredible resilience and determination throughout the year," the principal said. "She has faced challenges with grace and strength, and she has earned the respect of her peers and teachers alike. Maria, we are proud of you." As the applause echoed through the auditorium, Maria felt her heart swell. This wasn't about being recognized for a specific achievement. It was about being seen for who she truly was, for all the quiet moments when she chose to rise above the negativity and stay true to herself. She smiled as she made her way to the stage to accept her certificate. After the ceremony, students from all over the school approached Maria to congratulate her. Some had been friendly all year, but others were students who had once ignored or made fun of her. They came to her with smiles, offering words of encouragement and admiration. Maria didn't feel the need to prove anything to them anymore. The respect she had earned wasn't about them, it was about the person she had become. That evening, as Maria sat in her room, reflecting on everything that had happened, she realized how much she had grown. It wasn't just the fact that the bullying had stopped, or that she had made new friends. It was the internal shift, the way she had learned to believe in herself, to trust her strength, and to know that she was worthy of respect. Maria had entered that school as the new girl, unsure of where she fit in. Now, she was leaving it as someone who knew exactly who she was. She wasn't defined by anyone else's opinions. She was defined by her own actions, her own strength, and her own journey. And as she looked out her window at the setting sun, Maria knew that this was only the beginning. No matter what challenges lay ahead, she had the strength to face them, and she was ready for whatever came next. Jessica, for the most part, kept her distance, though there were still occasional moments where she would try to make a passive-aggressive comment. Maria just shrugged them off. She had learned long ago that some people wouldn't change, and she wasn't going to waste her time trying to change them. Instead, she focused on building the friendships that mattered, like the one she had with Emma. One afternoon, as Maria sat at lunch with Emma, a group of girls from her class came over to join them. Maria was surprised. She had never been part of a group like this before, and the sudden shift in how people were treating her felt both new and strange. But she didn't let it throw her off. She smiled, accepted the invitation, and made room for them at the table. It wasn't about being popular or fitting in anymore, it was about finding people who truly respected her for who she was. As the conversation flowed, Maria couldn't help but notice how different this lunch felt from the ones at the beginning of the year. There were no whispers behind her back, no snide comments or judgment. Instead, she was part of a group that was kind, genuine, and focused on enjoying the moment. She talked with Emma about their favorite movies, exchanged funny stories with the others, and felt, for the first time, like she truly belonged. But despite the positive change in her social life, there were still moments when Maria couldn't escape the feeling that Jessica and her group were watching her. It wasn't obvious, they didn't make any more direct moves, but Maria could feel the tension. It was as if they were waiting for her to slip up, to fail in some way. But Maria didn't give them the satisfaction. She continued to walk through the hallways with her head high, her steps sure and confident. She knew that she had nothing to prove to them anymore. The real change came one afternoon, during a class project. Maria and a few classmates were assigned to work together on a history project, and to her surprise, Jessica was in her group. At first, Maria was hesitant. She wasn't sure how things would go with Jessica so close, but she also knew that avoiding the situation wasn't the answer. They had to work together, and this was her chance to show that she wasn't the person they had assumed her to be. As they started discussing ideas, Maria kept the conversation focused on the task. Jessica, who had always been the leader in their group of friends, tried to take charge at first. But something was different this time. Maria didn't back down. She offered suggestions, explained her ideas clearly, and made sure everyone had a chance to speak. Slowly but surely, Jessica's attitude began to shift. Maria wasn't trying to show off or take control, she was simply standing her ground, asserting herself without being overbearing. After a few hours of working together, something unexpected happened. Jessica, who had once been cold and distant, actually complimented Maria on her research skills. "I didn't know you were this good," she said, her tone more neutral than before. Maria smiled, not because she wanted to rub it in, but because it felt good to know that her skills and hard work were being recognized. By the end of the project, the group had pulled together a presentation that they were all proud of. As they wrapped up, Jessica gave Maria a small nod of acknowledgement, something she had never done before. Maria could tell that Jessica was still processing everything, still grappling with the idea that Maria wasn't just the new girl or the outsider anymore. She was someone to be taken seriously. The following week, when the project was presented to the class, Maria stood in front of everyone with confidence. She wasn't the loudest or the most outspoken, but when she spoke, people listened. She knew her material inside and out, and she answered questions with clarity and poise. By the time the presentation was over, the class applauded, and Maria felt a sense of accomplishment that she hadn't experienced before. It wasn't about the praise or the recognition, it was about proving to herself that she was capable of anything she set her mind to. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the day, Maria walked out of the classroom with a feeling of peace. She had just completed a major milestone in her journey. She had stood up for herself when it mattered most, and now she was respected. The bullies weren't gone, but their power over her had diminished. Maria had learned something valuable: the only person who could truly define her was herself. That evening, as Maria sat in her room, she reflected on everything that had happened since the first day of school. The loneliness, the teasing, the feeling of being judged, it all seemed so far away now. In its place was a quiet sense of pride. She had faced the challenges head-on, and in doing so, she had become someone stronger, someone who wouldn't let anyone make her feel less than. And as she sat there, Maria realized that the hardest part of all wasn't the bullying or the isolation, it was believing in herself. She had done that, and now, nothing could stop her. Maria felt the weight of it, that unspoken assessment, and she quickly turned her attention to her notebook. She couldn't help but wonder if she was already being judged, if she was already someone to be looked down upon. But she wasn't going to let it bother her. At least, that's what she told herself. Maria's days at the new school seemed to blur together as she adjusted to life in a place where she was still finding her footing. Despite the moments of friendship with Emma, she could feel the tension between herself and Jessica's group. The subtle jabs, the sideways glances, and the way Jessica's group would stare at her whenever she wasn't looking, it all added up, and Maria could sense that something was brewing. As the weeks went on, the teasing became more personal. It wasn't just the comments about how different she was anymore, now they were picking at the small things. Maria's hair, her accent, the way she walked, even the food she brought for lunch. Nothing was off limits. It was clear to her now that Jessica and her friends had made her their target. One afternoon during gym class, things finally came to a head. They were playing basketball, and Maria, who wasn't the best player, found herself on the opposing team. She didn't mind, sports weren't her main focus anyway. But as the game went on, it became apparent that Jessica was determined to make the game more about embarrassing Maria than playing. Every time Maria tried to dribble or shoot, Jessica was right there, blocking her or making snide comments. "Nice try, Maria. You sure you know how to play?" Jessica sneered, as she easily stole the ball away from Maria. Maria bit her lip, trying to keep her composure. She was determined not to let Jessica get to her. But the game was getting frustrating. Every time she had the ball, someone from Jessica's group would foul her, push her, or just get in her way. The teacher didn't seem to notice, and Maria wasn't the type to cause a scene. She just wanted the game to end so she could escape the constant barrage. Finally, during one play, as Maria was running to the basket, Jessica shoved her hard, sending her tumbling to the ground. The whistle blew immediately, and the teacher walked over, but Maria could feel the coldness in Jessica's eyes, like she had just won some victory. It wasn't just about the game anymore. It was about making Maria feel small. Maria stood up slowly, dusting off her clothes. Her heart was racing, but her mind was clear. She had dealt with situations like this before. In her old school, she had been pushed around, underestimated, and ignored. But this time, something inside her snapped. This was her moment. She wasn't going to let Jessica or anyone else push her around anymore. Without saying a word, Maria turned and walked over to the side of the court. She could feel the stares of Jessica's group, could feel the tension in the air. They expected her to stay down, to get upset, but instead, Maria did something unexpected. She looked at the teacher, who was still standing by the sidelines, and asked if she could have a minute to talk. The teacher, puzzled, nodded. Maria stepped off the court and walked toward the back of the gym. She could hear Jessica and her friends whispering and laughing, but Maria ignored them. She needed to clear her head. She needed to focus. Her mind wandered to her training, to the martial arts her father had taught her over the years. She had learned how to defend herself not just physically, but emotionally as well. She was stronger than she realized. When she returned to the game, something was different. There was a calmness about her, a quiet confidence that made Jessica and her friends pause for a moment. Maria wasn't angry anymore, she wasn't trying to prove anything. She was just focused. And that focus was enough to change everything. As the game continued, Maria started to play with a new energy. She wasn't the best player on the court, but she was moving with precision, outmaneuvering Jessica and her friends with ease. Every time they tried to get in her way, she found a way around them. It was like she was one step ahead, anticipating their moves before they made them. Jessica's frustration grew with every passing minute. She started to make mistakes, overcompensating for her earlier confidence. At one point, as she attempted to block Maria from making a shot, she collided with another player, causing a fumble and turning the ball over. Maria, without hesitation, seized the opportunity and made a clean shot, scoring a point for her team. The gym fell silent for a moment, and Maria could feel all eyes on her. She had just outplayed Jessica in front of everyone, and the look on Jessica's face was priceless. For the first time, Maria felt like she had the upper hand. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone, but she was showing them that she wasn't someone to be underestimated. The game ended shortly after that, with Maria's team narrowly winning. As the bell rang, signaling the end of class, the students began to gather their things, chatting excitedly about the game. But for Maria, the victory wasn't just about the score. It was about reclaiming her sense of self. She had stood up for herself in a way that was powerful, but also quiet. She didn't need to shout or make a scene to make her point. She just needed to show them who she really was. After the class, as the students filed out of the gym, Jessica walked up to Maria. Maria braced herself, expecting more teasing or some snide remark. But Jessica surprised her. "You played well," she said, her voice almost begrudging. "I didn't expect that." Maria didn't say anything at first. She simply looked at Jessica and nodded, her expression calm. "Thanks," she replied, before turning and walking away. It was a small victory, but it felt huge to Maria. She had proven to herself that she didn't need anyone's approval. She didn't need to be liked by everyone. What mattered was that she was confident in who she was. And from that moment on, things began to shift. Jessica and her friends didn't bother her as much. They still tried to make her feel small, but now, Maria didn't feel the need to react. She just moved forward, knowing that she was in control of her own story. Days turned into weeks, and Maria found herself adjusting to her new school. The teasing continued, though it wasn't as obvious as it had been at first. It was more subtle now, behind her back. Jessica and her group would glance at her, whisper to each other, and giggle. At first, Maria tried to ignore it, but it was hard. It was as if she could feel the judgment in the air every time she walked through the hallways. Maria didn't want to let it affect her. She had been through worse before, and she had learned how to handle things with grace. But deep down, the isolation was beginning to weigh on her. It wasn't just the teasing, it was the fact that no one really tried to understand who she was. She wasn't just the new girl with a different skin color. She was more than that, and she was beginning to feel invisible. One afternoon, as Maria sat quietly at her desk in math class, she overheard a conversation between Jessica and one of her friends. They didn't think Maria could hear, but she caught every word. Jessica was talking about how different Maria was and how she was never going to fit in. She made fun of Maria's accent, the way she spoke, and even how she dressed. "I don't know why they let her in this school. She doesn't belong here," Jessica said, and her friend laughed. Maria's face turned red, and she felt the familiar sting of being judged. She had heard it all before. The whispers. The looks. She had always dealt with it by keeping her head down and pretending it didn't matter. But today, it hurt more than usual. It felt like no matter how hard she tried to blend in, they would always find a reason to keep her out. But then, something shifted. Maria was tired of running from it, tired of feeling small. She remembered something her grandmother had always told her: don't let anyone define who you are. You define yourself. Maria had always taken those words to heart, but now they felt like a call to action. She wasn't going to let these people make her feel less than. She wasn't going to let Jessica or anyone else decide her worth. The next day, Maria decided to sit in a different spot during lunch. She still didn't have any close friends, but she was tired of sitting at the same lonely corner table. She walked into the cafeteria with a sense of purpose, searching for an empty seat. Her eyes landed on a table in the far corner, next to the windows. It wasn't far from where Jessica and her friends usually sat, but it was out of their immediate line of sight. Maria took a deep breath and made her way over. When she sat down, she pulled out her lunch and began eating quietly. She didn't know anyone at the table, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't care. As she ate, she heard someone approach her. She looked up and saw a girl with short brown hair and bright blue eyes. "Mind if I sit here?" the girl asked, smiling. Maria nodded, surprised but grateful. The girl sat down across from her, and they started talking. Her name was Emma, and she was friendly and easy to talk to. Unlike Jessica and her friends, Emma wasn't looking to make fun of Maria. She asked genuine questions and listened intently as Maria spoke. They talked about their favorite classes, music, and even their families. It was nice to finally have a conversation that wasn't tainted by judgment or sarcasm. Over the next few days, Emma became Maria's first real friend at the school. She introduced Maria to other students who were kind and welcoming. They formed a small group, and for the first time, Maria felt like she belonged. She wasn't just the new girl or the black girl anymore. She was Maria, a student with her own personality and interests. But even though Maria was making progress in forming new friendships, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica and her friends were watching her every move. She had seen the way Jessica's eyes would narrow whenever she passed by their table, as if trying to figure out why Maria was sitting with Emma instead of keeping to herself. Maria didn't care, though. She had learned to ignore their whispers, to focus on the positive things in her life. And having Emma as a friend was one of the best things that had happened to her since she moved here. Still, the bullying didn't stop completely. It was quieter now, but it still existed. During gym class, Maria found herself the target of little snide remarks. One day, while they were running laps around the track, Jessica accidentally bumped into Maria, knocking her off balance. "Oops, sorry," Jessica said, but her tone was far from apologetic. Her friends laughed, and Maria could feel the heat rise in her cheeks. She didn't let it show, though. She straightened up quickly and continued running as if nothing had happened. The teasing was always there, like an undercurrent that Maria couldn't escape. But she wasn't the same girl who had walked into this school weeks ago. She had learned to stand tall, to push through the discomfort. Every time Jessica or her friends tried to tear her down, Maria would remind herself of who she was. She was strong, not just physically, but emotionally too. One day, during lunch, Jessica and her group decided to have a little fun at Maria's expense. As she was walking to her seat, one of the girls from the group tripped her, causing Maria to stumble. "Watch where you're going, new girl," the girl said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. The group erupted into laughter, but this time, Maria didn't feel embarrassed. She didn't feel small. Instead, she turned around and met Jessica's gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. It was as if the world had paused. Maria could see the challenge in Jessica's eyes, the unspoken dare. Maria didn't back down. She just looked at Jessica with a calm, steady expression, refusing to let her feel intimidated. The tension in the air was thick, but Maria simply walked to her seat, sat down, and began eating her lunch. No words were exchanged. But as she sat there, she knew that this moment had marked a change. Maria wasn't going to let the bullies control her anymore. She wasn't going to shrink back in fear. She was stronger than they thought. And in that moment, Maria realized that the best way to deal with these bullies wasn't to let them push her around. It was to show them that she was untouchable, not because she was trying to be tough, but because she was confident in who she was. They might keep trying to tear her down, but she wasn't going to let them win. Throughout the rest of the day, the stares continued. Maria tried to stay focused on her classes, but it was hard to ignore the glances. Whenever she walked down the hall, she could feel eyes following her. Some of the girls from the group that had been laughing earlier whispered behind her back as she passed, and Maria couldn't shake the feeling that they were talking about her. At lunch, she didn't know where to sit. She could see groups of friends talking and laughing, but she didn't have anyone to sit with. Her heart sank. Maria looked around and spotted an empty table in the corner of the cafeteria. It was as if the entire room had a silent rule: no one was going to approach her. She wasn't part of any group, and no one seemed interested in changing that. As Maria sat at the corner table, alone, she couldn't help but feel the sting of isolation. She had been through this before, but it didn't make it any easier. She had always been the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit in. In her old school, she had been used to it, but here, it felt different. The isolation here wasn't just about being new, it was about being different. Just as she was about to take a bite of her sandwich, she heard someone call her name. Maria looked up, startled, and saw one of the girls from the group, Jessica, standing at the edge of her table. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she gave a hesitant smile. "Mind if I sit here?" Jessica asked, her voice sweet but with an edge to it. Maria blinked, unsure if she had heard right. Why would Jessica want to sit with her? Was it some sort of joke? Sure," Maria said, not wanting to seem rude. Jessica sat down with a casual air, and Maria watched as the other girls from her group followed her. They all sat down around Maria, and for a moment, it seemed like maybe she wasn't going to be alone after all. But then, Jessica leaned in slightly and whispered something to the girl next to her, and they both giggled. Maria couldn't catch the words, but she could tell they were laughing at her. "Is this seat taken?" Jessica asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she pulled out a chair across from Maria. Maria could feel the tension in her chest, but she tried to remain calm. She nodded, unsure of how to respond. "No, it's not." For the next few minutes, Jessica and her friends continued to talk, occasionally throwing a glance at Maria. She could tell they weren't genuinely interested in getting to know her. They were just curious. But why? Was it because she was different? She thought about the way they looked at her like they were studying her, waiting for her to do something wrong. The rest of lunch passed in a blur. Maria ate her food quickly, wanting to escape the uncomfortable atmosphere. As the bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, Maria stood up, ready to leave. But before she could walk away, Jessica called after her. "Hey, Maria," Jessica said sweetly. "I hope you're not feeling too lonely here. If you need help with anything, just let me know." Maria turned back, unsure of how to respond. It was strange, Jessica's tone was so nice, but there was something about it that felt off. She smiled awkwardly and nodded, then quickly walked away, feeling the eyes of the group on her back. It didn't take long for Maria to realize that Jessica's help wasn't sincere. It was the beginning of a game. A game where Maria would be the target. She could already sense it, the way the group looked at her, the way they tried to make her feel out of place. But Maria wasn't going to let them win. She had been through too much to let anyone define her. She just had to figure out how to play their game. And she was going to do it on her terms.